Hello there everybody, and welcome back to another video essay. I am finally throwing my hat into the ring with Nando V
Hello.
Movie's latest collaboration. It is of course One Musical Scene. This is basically where a bunch of YouTubers, big or small, can get together and talk about their favorite musical scene in fiction media. It doesn't have to be just movies, it can be anything, TV shows, video games, what have you.
You think I don't know? How do I burn out a city that's baptized in fire? How do I kill off an army that's dead? Time's slipping away now, and the best plan we've got is just put one inside Satan's head. If roles were reversed, God, I know they'd save me, but all my solutions involve murder spree.
Now back to the show.
So, I have been naturally struggling to find out what could I possibly talk about, because there are a bunch of musical scenes that have stuck with me from my childhood to adolescence and of course to adulthood. But then I thought, let's go back to the one that really stuck with me, and that was Mr. Freeze's death from Batman Beyond. Now, if you have not seen the show in forever, then this is going to have a lot of spoilers, so I would recommend you go check out a bunch of Mr. Freeze's episodes up until his final appearance in Batman Beyond. Alright, so here we go. Now, I have always loved the character of Victor Freeze. He's been one of my favorite villains of Batman's Rogues Gallery for a long time, and of course, I grew up with the Bruce Timm animated series where they completely overhauled and reimagined the character as more of a tragic figure who was trying to save his beloved wife, Nora, but unfortunately, due to a mishap, he was mutated and given the ability to essentially not only live in sub-zero temperatures, but he was stripped away of everything that makes him human. So he dedicated the rest of his life to trying to find a cure and hopefully still be with his wife. Unfortunately, though, he had to become a monster in order to do it. Now, we have had a lot with Mr. Freeze. We've had his appearances in Gotham, Batman and Robin. The less said about that, the better. But I'm mainly going to be focusing on his appearance in the animated series. And I have to say, up until his death in Batman Beyond, I really loved what they were doing with him up until the 4th season of New Adventures. Here's just a quick rundown of everything that has happened to him so we can have a better idea of why his ultimate demise hits home with me and why the music accompanying it is some of the best the show ever produced. So, as I said, when we first meet Victor, he is of course trying to find a cure for his beloved wife Nora, who has to be frozen in cryostasis. But then, of course, an accident involving the owner of GothCorp leaves him more monster than man. And when we see him, he is seeking his revenge. Ultimately, he is captured by the Batman and put in Arkham, but justice is served on his behalf as Batman delivers the evidence of what happened to him and his wife to the news, and Mr. Freeze is left pondering to himself. The next time we see him, he is of course still in Arkham, but a billionaire who wants to have his immortality essentially kidnaps Mr. Freeze and forces him to make him, well, like Mr. Freeze. And in exchange, he'll give him his wife and maybe fund a cure for her. Ultimately, this doesn't go well, and Mr. Freeze is once again now alone. But this time, he is reunited with his wife, and they can now live in peace. Now we catch up to Batman and Sub-Zero, where it has been a few months, and he is living a good life, still trying to figure out a way to save his dying wife. But an accident causes her cryo chamber to break, and her condition has accelerated. So he needs to find Batgirl, who has her only rare blood type, in order to save her. Unfortunately, that does not happen, and Mr. Freeze ultimately, presumably, meets his demise after trying to save the Cape Crusader and his wife from a collapsing oil rig. until it is revealed at the end that Nora is saved and cured, and Mr. Freeze just so happens to see the broadcast, and finally he can rest knowing that his wife is okay, and it's all thanks to him. And he goes off into the winter to be with his 2 polar bears. But then we get to his appearance in The New Adventures, where something is wrong. He is going around destroying everything that means the world to people. Priceless artifacts, paintings, all because, as we find out, his condition has worsened, destroying his lower body and leaving him just a head. And he now is sad that he can never be with his wife again, after she waited for him but ultimately left for good. Of course, this would all be resolved in a issue of Batman Gotham Adventures, but that's a story for another time. And then we find out that Mr. Freeze wants to make the world suffer. Of course, Batman has to stop him, and he does, but this time it does look like Mr. Freeze is gone for good, but Batman isn't hedging his bets on that one. And that's pretty much it. Now, when we catch up with Mr. Freeze in the future, he is, of course, well, still immortal. He cannot die, presumably, but he's given an opportunity to be human again thanks to Derek Powers, and for a while, he's actually now in a much better place. And when we meet him now as a newborn man, he is a lot happier now. He has a ton of money that he is giving to charity, and of course, he has potentially a new love interest, the doctor who offered him this opportunity on Derek Powers' behalf, and things couldn't be going any better for them. But, unfortunately, tragedy and Mr. Freeze just go hand in hand, as we find out that his body is reducing and he is slowly turning back into Mr. Freeze. So, after a failed attempt to kill him, he goes back and gets out his cryosuit to begin his last reign of vengeance upon Gotham City by taking everything with him, because he wants to blow up a chemical compound that will essentially wipe out half of the population in Gotham City. But, as we all know, Batman stops him. But not just Batman, we also get to see Blight make his appearance, and it is essentially a battle of old versus new, heat versus cold. And in the end, Mr. Freeze does get the upper hand on Blight, but unfortunately, he's badly damaged, and it looks like he may finally get his wish, the sweet embrace of death.
You gotta get out of here, Freeze. The whole place is gonna go.
Believe me, you're the only one who cares.
That hits home for me, and I think it does for a lot of people, because when he says that, I think it obviously means Terry isn't the only one who's ever cared about Mr. Freeze, but Freeze himself has always cared about his well-being. His goal was just to live a normal life with his wife. All he wanted was human companionship and happiness, but that was all taken away from him. Victor Freeze has been dead for a long time, and now he finally gets to go and be a normal man just for this one instant, and that is be welcomed by death. Now we get to the track, which is personally my favorite track that is composed in Batman Beyond. It's a great mix of old and new. It sounds very much like it's a tribute to Shirley Walker's work in the animated series with the violins and just the slow string, but then once it finally gets to the climax, that's when it gets to the electronic guitar percussion that we see in Batman Beyond by Christopher Carter and a couple of other musicians that are so talented. And it just sounds amazing. There's so much tragedy in it, but at the same time, it does feel like it is a good end for the character. But not just that, it also feels like this is the end of an era. Batman the Animated Series
was where this all started, and to see one of the main villains who is responsible for winning the show's first Emmy back in the day now meet his conclusion, I think that's a great passing of the torch from Shirley Walker to the musical crew as well. And of course, even to this day, I still think of this scene in the song when Mr. Freeze comes up in conversation, and it is arguably the best way they could have handled the character's ultimate demise, because as Bruce Timm stated, he didn't want a lot of Batman villains coming back. And I think that that was a wise idea, but for Mr. Freeze, it was very appropriate that you bring him back in this manner. So, that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, sound off below of what you thought of this. And if you have any musical scenes that you would like to talk about, if you're a small YouTube channel like me, then I would highly recommend you get yourself out there. And big shout out once again to Nando V Movies for putting this together. I hope you all support this, give it a like, share, and subscribe. And until then, this is Saber King saying,
Hail to the king, baby.